Are you looking for an experience that will grow your teenagers' faith, increase their leadership skills, and teach them the discernment to engage with the world all around them, all while taking them on the adventure of a lifetime? I mean, who isn't looking for that? If your teenager loves fun, adventure, and wants to grow in their faith and leadership this summer, then send them to Excel's Summer Leadership Camp. Excel's Summer Leadership Camp is a 12-day experience for passionate young leaders looking to discover God's truth, to discern wisely, and live wholeheartedly. Your teenager will embark on a transformative journey in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where they'll build lasting friendships in the context of community, embark on thrilling adventures like camping, rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and they will receive expert training and certifications in categories like CPR and wilderness first aid. Each aspect of the camp is woven together to help them learn to discover truth, to discern wisely, and take godly action in the context of real-life situations. To learn more or begin an application, go to theexcelcamp.org. That's theexcelcamp.org. Hurry, because summer is just around the corner.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Reclamation Podcast, where our goal is to help you reclaim good practices for faith and life. I'm Tony, and today is episode 130 of the podcast, where I sit down with author, speaker, and generational guru, John Basie. Now, John has a brand new resource out called Know, Be, Live. And I think what you're going to find in our conversation today is that we dive deep in the idea of leadership capacities for generations. What does it mean to reach the next generation? And how do we wrap it all up nice and neat in our faith? He's part of a nonprofit called Impact 360. We talk about that. We talk about college-age kids. We talk about what it's like to be a professor in college these days. I think you're going to love this conversation. And hey, if you do love it, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts. You can do it on iTunes. You can do it on Spotify. You can do it pretty much anywhere and subscribe. I use an app called Overcast, which I love. I actually listen to most of my podcasts at 1.5 speed. But all that to say, if you subscribe, it's the best way to make sure that you don't miss any future content coming from the Reclamation Podcast. And I can begin to share with you some of the incredible things that we are doing with Spirit and Truth. One of which is a conference. That's right. We'll be at a conference coming up this March, the Spirit and Truth Conference. I would love to give you a discount code. So if you go to spiritandtruth.life and then click on the conference button, once you sign up, if you put reclamation in there, we're going to save you 10% on your registration fees here in Dayton, Ohio. 10%. Spirit and Truth Conference. We've got some incredible speakers coming, guys like Kevin Watson and so many more, Marion Hayes. I'll be there. Of course, Matt Reynolds, Maggie Ulmer, so many great speakers that you need to hear. This is what it means to be a part of a network. We're connecting with like-minded individuals, helping renew the local church. So, hey, come hang out with us in Dayton the third week of March. You don't want to miss it. Spirit and Truth Conference. Now, without any further ado, here's my conversation with John Basie.
Back to the podcast. I'm excited today to have author, speaker, and researcher John Basie with us. John, thanks so much for being here today.
It's great to be here, Tony. Thanks for having me.
And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite discussions in the world. We're going to talk about discipleship, and specifically your brand new resource, Know, Be, Live, a 360 approach to discipleship in a post-Christian era. And so I wanted to start by asking you to give us your working definition of the word discipleship.
Yeah, this is one of the central questions, isn't it? When we talk about not just church life, but life for believers in general. Discipleship, we would say at Impact 360 Institute, is apprenticeship unto Jesus. We are his apprentices. And some in the Christian tradition have referred to discipleship in this way. We think it's helpful. We don't think it's the only way to describe discipleship, but we do think discipleship unto Jesus is not so dissimilar to an apprentice who might say work alongside a master carpenter learning how to do what he does and the way he does it, or some other trade perhaps. If you had an apprentice there in the studio teaching her or him how to do what you do, you would in effect be discipling that young person to do what you do in the most excellent way that you've learned how to do it.
Now, this is obviously, Matthew 28, the Great Commission, is one of the primary texts that we use when we talk about making disciples. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations.
That's right.
But for most Christians, what I've found is that we've never been discipled. So I'm curious, John, were you discipled as a young man or currently being discipled? What's that look like in your life?
Yes, I was fortunate and very thankful to grow up in a Christian home. My father is a retired minister. He's been a minister for as long as I can remember. And so with my parents, my mother and my father, they discipled me in their home. From there, I can remember really getting the sense that I was beginning to own my faith as a result of deep community and a discipleship process that happened in our church's youth group starting in 11th grade. And that was an energizing thing for me. And I started to realize there's much more to this discipleship thing than just praying a prayer and realizing I have the fire insurance, so to speak, to get into heaven.
Right.
And then from there in college, there were some mentors, some key mentors in college, graduate school, who discipled me further as I drew closer to Christ. Got married in 1997. My wife of nearly 25 years now and I have had mentors who have discipled us even now, and we look to those people. So that's a really important thing that I'm glad you brought up.
I do think it's one of we always talk about here at the church and in a lot of my work that disciple making, it has to be intentional, it has to be relational, and it has to be reproducible. Right. And those are kind of the three characteristics of a good disciple making relationship. And that matches up really well with your apprenticeship, because it's more than just teaching someone the trade, but it's teaching someone how to do the trade on their own.
Yes.
And I think that feels like a very important distinction when we're talking about disciple making. When you think about your mentors that have poured into you, is there anything that you've picked up from them that you still do today? Or like when you think about your daily disciplines, what can you attribute to the people who have poured into you over the years?
Yes, this is a great question. And it gets to the heart of this book, Know, Be, Live. And what I would say, Tony, is the mentors, the people who are farther along in their faith journey than what I am have learned how to live their life holistically, honoring Christ. They have learned over the course of their journey with Jesus that discipleship is not just something we do in church on Sunday and Wednesday night or at the men's breakfast. It's not parsed out like that. It is living life holistically as unto him, which is why the book is titled Know, Be, and Live. These are aspects of who we are as image bearers of God. And so that's what I would say is the best mentors that I've had are ones who have lived holistically as unto Christ.
Now, much of your research is centered around Gen Z. Mm-hmm. And I have two questions that I want to ask you. The first one is can you give us some parameters on who Gen Z is? And then the second one is, how does one get called to ministry to a particular generation. I'm curious how this call manifested itself in your life.
Sure. Yeah, according to the Barna studies that we have used, and this has been something that's been a real blessing for us. My good friend and colleague Jonathan Morrow has led our team here at the Institute to partner with the Barna organization to produce groundbreaking research on Gen Z, and specifically the way that they think about faith. The first study came out in 2018. We just had another one come out earlier this year, a follow-up study. And so different sociologists and researchers might consider Gen Z differently from just in terms of the window of time. But what we the way that we think about Gen Z, they really, most of them were born anywhere from 1999 to 2015, and that's the Barna research that we tend to use. So 1999 to 2015 is that window of time. And how do we get called to this kind of ministry with Gen Z? Well, I was called, as I look back on it now, back in 1997. This was a year after I graduated college in South Carolina. I realized, I think I'm not sure what exactly this is going to look like, but I'm pretty sure that the Lord is calling me to walk alongside other believers in some form or fashion, regardless of their age and generation. And so that set me on a course in graduate school, and did master's, PhD, and became a professor and administrator. And as you would know, Tony, those of us who work in the higher ed industry, we age, but the freshmen, they stay the same age every year. Every year they come in and they're 17 or 18. Yeah. And that's how it works. And so first I was working with millennials, and now they've pretty much aged out and they're in the workforce. Gen Z, they are the generation now that is dominating higher education. And that's not to say that there aren't adult learners as well. There certainly are, and many of them. But in terms of traditional residential based higher education, it's definitely Gen Z. And so that's where we find our calling. That's what our institute is up to right now. Our mission is to cultivate leaders who follow Jesus. That's the institute's mission. And we are thrilled to welcome Gen Zers every year who are part of our gap year, our year-long fellows program, biblical worldview and servant leadership. Our masters, our 2-year accredited master's program in leadership that also has a spiritual formation track, and some really fantastic summer programs in worldview and leadership as well. So right now, Gen Z is the population that is coming to us. They are the apprentices who are seeking to be like Jesus, and we're privileged to serve them.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's so important, and the work that you guys are doing at the Institute looks actually. I was like, man, I wonder at 41, is it too late for me to get in? Because it looks awesome.
Thank you.
And I thought, man, that'd be a lot of fun to go. And what incredible resources. I'm curious. As you so appropriately said, you're aging, but the freshmen don't. Right. And what an interesting view from being in higher education for as long as you have. What have you learned about God and the world as you've seen generation after generation come sit in your class? And you're not that old, so I'm not talking right. Like 60 years of higher ed here, but I would imagine there are some realizations every year about who's coming in next. I'm curious if you could share any of those with us.
Absolutely. I can remember not sitting, actually, I was standing in the front of the class. It was 2006 or 2007. here at the Institute, this was in our first or second year of our accredited, what we call our fellows program now, and thinking, okay, so I'm called to a teaching ministry with millennials. At that time, millennials, they were the generation coming through and starting their education, finishing their education in some cases, but realizing as we get to 2010, 12, and then now finally to today, okay, Gen Zers are different in some key ways. One of the key ways is they are digital natives, and you've probably talked to some other guests about this. Most of them don't remember a time when their parents didn't have mobile devices. And I cannot overemphasize how much that has radically changed, not just the classroom, but discipleship in general. When a young person who claims to follow Christ is constantly being followed around by all kinds of messages because of the phone that they're carrying, the notifications, the calls from whomever, not just home. Some of them come from home, but from friends. And it's really not even the calls, it's the texting, right? And the constant bombardment from this technology that on its own as a tool, of course, can be used for amazing things. I mean, we're having this interview today because of incredible technology. And in this case, I would say we're stewarding the technology well. Well, this is one of the key questions for those who seek to disciple Gen Z, and that is, how do we disciple a generation that is so deeply steeped in a virtual reality? And this is just we're all learning as we go. I wouldn't say by any means that I or anyone at our institute has fully figured this out. This is why we commissioned the Barna Group to help us with the research. What does it look like to disciple this generation, given the technology that they have imbibed really since birth?
Yeah. It's such an interesting idea, and it seems like the infiltration of technology, like the access to it, has gotten so much earlier too. And we actually had George Barna himself on the podcast, and I know he's not with the Barna Group anymore, but I think he was episode 114. And one of the things that he said is that most of our worldview is already formed by 13. And so I'm curious, as you're bringing Gen Z into the institute, and you're shaping and you're giving them some challenging ideas, what worldview are they bringing in with them, and how hard or easy is it to shift that to a biblical worldview?
That's right. It's a great question. Our answer to that here, Tony, might be a little different from someone who's working, say, at a state university, perhaps even a traditional Christian college that allows non-believing students to enroll. And there are some fantastic Christian colleges out there who have a tremendous ministry because their enrollment model is that way. Many non-believing students come to Christ because of faithful believers and disciplers on those campuses. And the same for state universities and the campus ministries and so forth. But to answer your question, what I would say is, okay, so this is the part where you might want to edit. Remind me the question.
What worldview are they bringing in?
Yes.
And what how hard or easy is it
Yeah.
to shift it?
I got off on a tangent. I apologize. So the
No,
worldview that
it was
they're
a long question too. It doesn't make it easier.
yeah uh, the worldview that they're bringing with them to the institute for the most part is a fairly biblically centered worldview because of our own
Mm,
enrollment model, and we will only allow followers of Jesus to come to our program, not because we think there's no value for non-believers, but because we want for all of our students to start at a certain level. And we need to be certain that they have all committed themselves to Christ, even if they're somewhat younger believers. Now, the deeper
sure.
question I think there is, okay, how biblical really is their worldview?
Mm,
And that would be a fair question to ask. The Barna research indicates that only 4%, only 4% of Gen Z holds to a truly biblical worldview. And and there are certain parameters around the definition of biblical worldview that help to shape uh, that result. It's a pretty narrow set. Uh, this would exclude those who have pretty much hitched their wagon to progressive Christianity and might say things like,
sure.
"Well, yeah, sure, I love Jesus, but he's not the only way." Well,
Right.
we would say no, that's not a biblical worldview. On our definition and on the definition that Barna uses in the research, Jesus is the only way.
Mm,
And when you get that specific, it narrows down to 4%. And there are other
wow.
questions. Jesus makes a difference in my everyday life, and other items. The way I think, act, behave on a daily basis makes a difference because of my relationship to Christ. Ethics are in no small part attached to my relationship to Jesus, and morality is affected because of the relationship I have with Him. All of those things are a part of what goes into that definition. So when we get that specific, what I would say we've noticed over the years is that our students love Jesus, but and there is no but to that part of it. I would say, and we have to help them recognize that the culture has also affected the way they think about their own relationship with Him. In some cases, they've grown up in churches where they're surrounded by believers who love Jesus, but the church has not taught them how to cultivate the life of the mind, for example. Uh,
Mm,
Good thinking. How do we think well about what's happening in the culture? Uh, and before we even do that, how do we think well about God's special revelation that He's given to us, the Bible? And is it true from cover to cover? And does God really mean what He says in the Scriptures? Can I have confidence that what He says in the Scriptures is true? Does God lead
mm,
me in my life? And so I'll tell you, Tony, one of the things that we find year after year, and it's more true now than when we started the Institute in 2006, we have to help young Christ followers understand that relativism is not true. Moral relativism,
mm,
if we hold to a truly biblical worldview, that excludes, by definition, moral relativism, the idea that right and wrong are determined by a certain context or a certain culture, uh, or even a more pernicious view than that would be moral subjectivism. It is determined, morals are determined solely by me as an individual. And so
Yeah, that's that whole idea about like I'm living my truth. You know,
yes,
when
that's
your version,
exactly right.
my truth, or I don't feel like and there's anything wrong. It becomes there is no right or wrong, right? It's what's all subjective, right or wrong.
That's right. That's right. And in the book, we have a chapter on postmodernism. Two of our own team members, Ed and Dana Bort, did a fantastic job of talking about the effects of postmodern culture and thinking on the life of the mind and Gen Z in particular. And they talk about that very thing where, we hear people say it all the time, and they're not always even members of Gen Z. Sometimes they are members of Gen X. They'll say, you do you, right? Whatever works for you. And we hear young people saying all the time things like what you just mentioned. This is my truth. And I was watching a video on Facebook just the other day of a young lady who was talking about something, and she said that very phrase, "This is my truth." And maybe some of you guys can identify with it. So I would say, Tony, that is one of the key things that we're keeping track of, and we're just as we move into the future, with culture such as it is, political instability, cultural instability, there is no question that a secular culture wants us to grab onto a moral, a view of morality that is relativistic to its core, such that there is no such thing as objective truth.
So, the reality is a lot of people who are listening to this podcast will be in that millennial, Gen X generation, right? I'm probably not hitting that Gen Z target audience very hard.
Sure.
I know that I do have a couple of kids from Fellowship of Christian Athletes who I've worked with over the years who listen, and I'm super thankful for them. But for the most part, we're talking to people who are going to be disciplers.
That's right.
To this generation, this Gen Z, right? So I'm wondering, can you take us through kind of a macro look of what know, be, live is, and because I think what you've done is you've created a very loose but very intentional framework for disciple making that would be a valuable place to start if anyone wants to think about how to approach Gen Z.
Yes, this is a great question, and I'm glad you said what you did about your audience. For the most part, Gen Xers are the parents of Gen Z, and so for any of your listeners out there who are your age, my age, I'm 47. I have 3 kids who are Gen Zers. This certainly is applicable, and for millennials, your kids may not be quite there. In fact, they're talking now about what's the name of Generation Alpha. That's all they can come up with at the moment. What's the generation that comes after?
It's not a very creative group.
Right? That's right. That's right. So but the millennials in your audience certainly are discipling Gen Z. And so when we talk about know, be, and live, this is the motto. It's the motto of Impact 360 Institute, but it's not just a motto. The board years ago was very intentional about making know, be, and live the spiritual transformation pillars on which this institute is built. The institute is not about a building. It's not about even the incredible programs that we have, but it's about the mission that we have moving forward, the mission to cultivate leaders who follow Jesus. And so when we talk about the know, for example, here's what we mean by that. We talk about knowing Jesus more deeply. And we talk about growing in your understanding of what God has revealed about reality and why Christianity is true. And so this is the part of discipleship that we would call intellectual discipleship. This is a couple of our authors in the book talk about how the church, for all of its good efforts in other areas, in large part, that many churches haven't really hit the bullseye in terms of intellectual discipleship. Does Jesus care about the life of the mind? Do we believe Colossians that he is the center of all things? He himself holds all things together. And what does that mean for a disciple who wants to study God's created order to understand how the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ himself, literally holds the universe together by the word of his power? Is that something worth studying? We think it is, and it requires intellectual activity. We help our students understand that study itself is a spiritual discipline. Study is an act of worship unto God for the believer. When I'm studying chemistry or when I'm studying English literature, if I truly believe that God is sovereign over every square inch of the created order, then I will treat my study of these disciplines just as seriously as I treat my theological studies. Now, I want to be careful as I say that and nuance that, because certainly the Bible and theology, there's something that I'm assuming there, and that is that we have built enough of a solid biblical worldview that we can begin to see the other academic disciplines through the lens of Scripture and sound theology. But intellectual discipleship is what the know part of who we are is all about. The second part is be, and we talk about being transformed in our character. We want to be transformed in our character, and we want to discover our identity in Christ and our God-given callings in authentic community. So this part of it is all about the heart and the way that desires are formed. And Paul talks about this in his letter. In his letters, Jesus talks about desires, and one of the people that has meant a lot to us over the years here at the Institute. He's now in heaven with Jesus, but Dallas Willard, who was professor of philosophy at the University of Southern California for years and years and years, wasn't only an intellectual philosophy professor, but he was one of the foremost experts in the world of spiritual formation. He and Richard Foster and others. And he talks about desire in many of his works. And even long before Willard, we have church historians and church fathers like Augustine talking about the way that we come to love the things that we love. Do we have the correct loves? Are the things that we love the things that Christ would be not just pleased with, but are we loving things in a way that is consistent with the way that he designed us as image bearers? Yeah. He designed us to love himself. And in a fallen world, in a sinful world, it's an understatement, isn't it, to say that we get distracted sometimes. Sin is much more than a distraction. It's utter corruption. At a minimum, it distracts us, and at worst, it completely destroys us. And without the Lord's help, we find ourselves in a serious downward spiral that we can't get out of without His help. But But that being transformed in our character, how do we come to love the right things, is all about the be portion. And so in this part of the book, we're talking about things that get at the heart, things such as John Stonestreet, for example, president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, talks about this very thing that I've been sharing. How do we come to love the right things? And the great commandment, love of God, love of neighbor, he talks about that and how important it is to get those things in the right order. Have we ever thought as believers what love would look like if Jesus had said, love your neighbor first and then love God? How would that change things? But he didn't put it in that order, right? And he's actually referencing he's referencing the Old Testament, right? Love your God and then love your neighbor. And he's reaffirming. He's taking that and reaffirming it in his own day. And he's saying, look, there is a God out there, and he has designed you in a certain way. He's designed you to love himself. And because he's designed you to love himself, you are then set free to love others properly. And it must be in that order. And John, in his chapter, talks about some things that can happen when our culture tries to convince us to reverse that order, love people first and then love God. So that's just a sample of what we talk about in the book. And then finally, the live portion, Tony, this is where we say that the know and the be, they're absolutely fundamental to a life of discipleship, but we have to give those things legs and let them go somewhere, and we have to do something with them, right? So we want to live a life of kingdom influence, And we unpack that by saying we live a life of spirit-powered kingdom influence as we cultivate a servant's heart. And certainly Jesus was the ultimate servant. And in this part of the book, we have various topics where I have a chapter on calling and how to understand God's call on our lives. It's only a single chapter. There's not enough space to cover such a comprehensive topic, but hopefully it's helpful.
But it's funny, as I was looking through the book, I was like, oh, you could have written 20 books with all these topics that you covered, right? I think there's 13 chapters. I'm like, oh, there's 13 different books in here. But what you've really done is just created a palatable sample size of the idea, right? Like
that's right.
Each chapter, like, yeah, here's enough of content to get you started. But if God were to lead you, like if you're really wrestling with your calling, this isn't necessarily a book about calling, but you could get started on discipling someone who's got a desire to figure out their calling, right?
That's exactly right. And one of the great things about a volume like this, Tony, where it's an edited multi-contributor volume, is the reader can read it straight through if he or she wants, or you can take it out of order, chapters on their own, and they're discrete chapters, and they can make sense on their own without having to read other chapters. But just a little bit about how did we come up with these topics? The way that we decided what topics to bring up and unpack was largely determined by the results of the Barna research itself. So the 2018 study on Gen Z that we partnered with Barna, again, my colleague Jonathan Morrow led that effort here at the Institute. We took a look at those results and asked ourselves, okay, what are the key areas in which this research has presented results that could be most helpful for those who are seeking to disciple Gen Z. And that's how we came up with the vast majority of these chapters. And so we let the research itself guide the topics that we put into the book. So if the research is digging up questions, challenges, and opportunities for Gen Z and saying, here's what we found through the research, this book is designed to help take it to the next step, to be hopefully some helpful solutions to those questions and challenges and opportunities that disciplers of Gen Z might be open to using.
Yeah, I think that's pretty brilliant, right? Like take the parts of the world that Gen Z are struggling with the most, turn that into the tool.
That's right.
Turn that into the tool that we use to disciple them, which feels much like what Jesus did in his ministry, right? Like, hey, this is the woman who's about to get stoned story, right? Like it's her stones that are going to kill her, but it's also that's how she's going to be saved, and that's that whole process there of redeeming the brokenness in the world. And that just seems to match up really well with, how Jesus did his ministry, right? I mean, I think that goes together beautifully.
That's right. That's right.
There's so many good things in this resource. There's so many different voices, contributors. Some really, really intelligent people have obviously put in a lot of time and effort into this. As you think about, like, man, what do you hope comes from this book? What do you hope, if one of our Gen Xers who are listening or one of our millennials who are listening, they pick up this book at the end of reading it, what's the desired outcome that you guys are praying for as it comes to this resource?
Yes. That's a great question, Tony. And I would say the answer is it's similar to if you'd ask the question around any, if you'd ask the question with respect to any generation, it's really the same. We want the readers of this book to be more equipped to help young people be apprentices to our Lord and Master Jesus Christ, to learn how to be like him.
Amen.
And to mature in their faith and to love him with their hearts, souls, and minds, and to love their neighbors as themselves. And that's true for what I just said there is true for all believers, no matter what the age, right? And so the fact that this is focused on Gen Z, we're not making a case that discipling Gen Z is more important than discipling other generations. It's rather
they're just who's up next.
They're who's up next, and because of the way that the world is different, we have to be asking ourselves as Christ followers who disciple them, what does discipleship right now in this post-Christian era look like? What are the timeless truths that we've always used in discipleship? But then what are some methods, perhaps, that might need to change a little bit in order for Gen Z to really understand what does it look like to follow our Lord and Master, Jesus Christ, and become more like him over the course of a lifetime?
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Okay, I have one more question for you. But before we do that, I know that my listeners are going to want to follow you and the Institute on the interwebs. What's the best way that they can learn more about your ministry? Where should they go to purchase the book, and how can they support what God's doing through this platform?
Yes. Thanks for asking. The best place to go to find out more about the Institute would be our website, Impact 360. That's impact360.org. and you'll find everything that you want to know about our institute, our programs. There are lots of free resources on the website. There's a Gen Z lab that you can sign up for free and get some really helpful videos and tutorials, really well done. As far as the book is concerned, any of the major booksellers online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, the book is available there. Know, Be, Live.
Excellent. Now, what about you? If they want to learn more about you personally, any places online where you hang out publicly? It's okay if you don't.
I do. I don't have my own website anymore. I got a little too busy and had to drop that. But if you'd like to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn, and you can just do a search for John Basie, Basie, and it'll pop right up.
Great, and we'll link to all that in the show notes.
I'm on Facebook as well.
Last question I always loved. Oh, great. Facebook as well. We'll make a note there. Last question I always love to ask people. It's an advice question. And you have to give yourself one piece of advice, but I get to pick the day that you have to give it. And so I would like to take you back to your very first day of teaching, right? And you just spent your very first day teaching higher education. You've got this brand new group of freshmen standing right in front of you. Exhausting day, I'm sure. And at the end of the day, if you could go back and give that younger version of John one piece of advice for the journey he's about to go on, what's the piece of advice?
Yeah, great question. I think what it would have to be, Tony, is I would say to that younger version of me, don't over prepare. There's always an impulse on the part of professors to, or I should say there's usually an impulse on the part of teachers, professors to over prepare, and thus thinking that the delivery of the information is the main thing that we're doing. And over the years, as I've grown in my teaching and understood more and more, and I certainly haven't arrived, but I do think the Lord has helped me in this regard, as I've understood what intellectual discipleship really is. It is walking alongside students. It's not merely presenting information. It includes that, but too much of a focus on presenting information correctly can become it can become a little bit of a distraction, sometimes a major distraction, to building relationships in the class. And if a class of students senses that you want to walk alongside them, they're going to learn far more than if you are just a really fantastic information presenter. The old adage, I guess, is be a guide on the side, not a sage on the stage. And that's the advice I would give to myself if I could do it, if I could go back in time and do that.
That's so good, man. We covered a lot of ground today. I'm so appreciative of your work. I'm appreciative for Gen Z and my son, who will be the aforementioned alpha generation. He's 15 and a half. And man, I just know how important this work is. And I'm super thankful for your generosity today and all the work that you and your team are putting into the next generation of making disciples. So John, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Tony. And I'm encouraged by your ministry, and it's just an honor to be with you today.
Man, I love John's heart for the next generation. I love the way that he shows up for them. I love the perspective. And I really think that his newest resource, Know, Be, Live, is going to be something that you'll want to get your hands on. So do me a favor, follow him up, hit him on socials, let him know that you heard him here on the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen. Leave a rating or review on iTunes. Those really do make a difference. And as always, the highest compliment you can give us, share this episode with a friend. Thank you guys so much for being part of our community. And remember, if you want to follow Jesus, you must be willing to move.